Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this Greater Good Flamesword Battle General model, kindly sent to me by Wargame Exclusive, and perfect as a Tau proxy model for your games of Warhammer 40,000. So as you can see, the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice, smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm coming in with some Rhinox hide. I'm going to paint all of the undersuit to the model. So she's got a lot of fabric here showing through from underneath the armour plates. So I'm going to make sure I catch all of these with a layer of Rhinox hide. The reason I'm doing these first is because they're deeper than a lot of the other details we're going to be painting, so that's why it makes it a lot easier to paint this undersuit area without worrying about catching details that we'll be painting in later. So just make sure you catch all of the undersuit. So it's these parts here on her legs. She's got some on her arms as well, and a little bit showing through by her waist and her neck. Just make sure you catch all of these areas with a coat of Rhinox hide. And after that Rhinox hide has been applied, you see we've built up a nice smooth Rhinox hide base colour all over the undersuit. So now with some Tau light ochre, I'm going to be coming in, I'm going to paint all of the armour to the model. So there's a lot of armour panels on this model. I'm just going to make sure I catch all of them with a couple of layers of Tau light ochre. This colour isn't going to give fantastic coverage over the black. By working a couple of smooth, thin layers, we build up to a nice solid base coat of Tau light ochre all over the armour panels. Just make sure you take your time at this step, work your way around the model, and pick out all of the panels of armour with a couple of layers of Tau light ochre. Try and be nice and neat when you're around the undersuit we've painted with Rhinox hide. It doesn't matter if you get some Tau light ochre over other areas, as we will be coming in and painting over these with other colours later. See here, I'm catching these parts here to her helmet, trying to avoid the hair and the skin details. I'm just going to paint all of this with a couple of layers of Tau light ochre. At this stage I'm also going to pick out all of the gun with some Tau light ochre as well. We'll be coming in and adding a few other details to this gun at a later stage, but for now just make sure you catch all of the gun with a couple of layers of Tau light ochre. And after a few layers have been applied, you can see I've built up to a nice solid smooth colour all over the armour and the gun. So now with some of the fang, I'm going to come in and start painting the skin. So this will probably take a couple of layers again, but just slowly build up a couple of smooth layers of the fang all over the skin to the model. This is a nice base coat for that blue skin that the Tau have. To be nice and neat around all of the armour panels, you don't want to get this over any of the ochre we've already painted. Just make sure you pick out all the bits of skin with a couple of coats of the fang. So we'll see her face, her hands here, and there's also some bits down by her feet as well. So I'm just going to make sure I catch these with a couple of layers of the fang. And once that's been applied, you can see we've got a nice blue colour all over the areas of exposed skin. So it's time to start picking out some details on the model. For the first of these, with some Mournfang Brown, I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint this sash banding going down her chest here. I'm going to pick this out with a couple of layers of Mournfang Brown. And I'm also going to pick out these pouches here on her side, so just make sure you catch these with a couple of layers of Mournfang Brown as well to build up to a nice solid brown colour. And with that Mournfang Brown applied, the next thing we're going to do is pick out a few other details like the hooves, some straps and some details on the gun. For this, I'm going in with some Corvus Black. First of all, I'm just going to apply it over the bits of exposed hooves here at the bottom of her feet, just catching these with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. Also, any straps on the model, like this one here on her leg, I'm going to catch this with some Corvus Black. Some on her arms and other places as well. I'm just going to make sure I catch any of these with a layer of Corvus Black. I'm also going to catch her hair with some Corvus Black as well. Just give a nice dark hair colour on the model. Finally, I'm going to pick out this little bit of cabling here on her gun. Going to catch this with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. And also, I'm going to pick some panels and details on the gun as well. I'm going to block these areas in with some Corvus Black. So I'm picking a few of these vented areas here on the sides of the gun. Paint these with some Corvus Black. I'm also picking this panel here by the scope just to add some interest, break up that ochre colour. Let's just pick a couple of random panels and paint those panels with some Corvus Black. Try and be nice and neat with this Corvus Black. You don't want to get it over any of the ochre we've already painted. Just pick out a couple of random panels with some Corvus Black. And with that Corvus Black applied, you can see it's added some interest to the gun, broken up that ochre colour a little bit, just added some details to the model. So now with some Xandri dust, I'm going to come in and pick out any of these little bits of sort of rope detail here holding the ornaments onto her legs, as well as the tiny little bit of stitching around her neck. Just going to catch these details with a couple of layers of Xandri dust. With that Xandri dust applied, it's once again broken up those colours a little bit more, added some interest on the model. So now with some Warpstone Glow, I'm going to come in and paint the sort of stones hanging from those bits we just painted with the Xandri dust. I'm going to paint these up as sort of glowing stones. So just make sure you cover these with a couple of layers of Warpstone Glow. See, after a couple of layers, you've got a solid colour of Warpstone Glow on those stone details. So the next thing to do is to pick out any metallics. So to start with, for this, I'm coming in with some Lead Belcher first. I'm just going to apply this over the blades to her sword. It's going to catch this blade with a couple of layers of Lead Belcher. Obviously being nice and careful around the ochre we've already painted. Just pick out the saw blade with a couple of layers of Lead Belcher. Now with some Retributor armour, going to pick out any detail I want to be gold. So for this, I'm picking these details here on the gun, just picking a few small details, painting them with some Retributor armour. I'm just going to pick out this one here on her chest as well. There's some on her sword as well. So I'm just picking a few of these details out with a couple of layers of Retributor armour. And with that Retributor armour applied, there's all the base coats applied to the model. So now it's time to apply some shades. So the first one of these, I'm coming in with some Agrax Earth Shade. And first of all, I'm going to apply this as a pin shade to all of the armour panels. So wherever there's a recess or the edge of any details, I'm just coming in with a thin line of Agrax Earth Shade and applying this as a pin shade around all the details. Just take your time at this step. Keep these shades nice and thin. Just apply a pin shade to all of the details that we paint with Tau Ochre. This step may take a while, but it's a lot quicker than doing an all over shade all over the armour and then having to come back in and brighten it back up. But if at any point you do come in a bit too thick with any of these pin shades of Agrax Earth Shade, you can come back in with some Tau Ochre and thin those lines back down again. Just take your time, work your way around the model and apply a thin pin shade of Agrax Earth Shade all over the armour. And whilst doing the same to all the panels to her gun as well, just coming in applying a thin pin shade of Agrax Earth Shade into all of the recesses and around all the details on her gun. And I'm also applying this as an all-over shade to all the areas we paint with the fang. So that's going to be all over her skin. I'm also going to apply it to any areas we paint with Retributor armour as well. And the Morn Fang Brown. So just give these areas an all-over shade of Agrax Earth Shade. And now with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade all the other areas. So that's going to be the undersuit, anything we paint with Corvus Black or Lead Belcher. Just going to catch all of these areas with an all-over shade of Nuln Oil. So be nice and careful when you're around areas of Tau Ochre. You don't want to get any of the Nuln Oil over these details. Just make sure you catch all of the areas paint with Corvus Black and Lead Belcher with some Nuln Oil. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And after those shades have dried, you can see it's added definition all over the model. So now it's time to start highlighting. The first thing I'm going to highlight is her skin. So for this, I'm coming with some Rust Grey first. I'm going to apply it all over the skin, but avoiding areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever there's some Agrax Earth Shade in a recess, I'm leaving that in the recess, coming in on either side of it, and brighten those areas up with a layer of Rust Grey. You can see here on the face how the shade has settled into the eye sockets and around areas like the mouth and the cheeks and things. So I'm leaving that Agrax shade in all of the recesses, but brightening the rest of the skin up with a couple of layers of rust grey. On the hands here you can see the shade settled into the recess between all the fingers and around the knuckles. So I'm leaving that Agrax shade in those recesses, coming in on either side and brightening the skin up to a nice bright blue colour. And don't forget the areas of skin shown by her hooves as well. Make sure you catch this with some rust grey as well. And after that rust grey's been applied, you can see it's really brightened up those areas of skin, put it up to a much brighter Tau skin tone. So now with some Fenrisian grey, I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight on all the sharpest points of the skin. There's things here like her eyebrows, her bottom lip, her chin, any sharp points to her cheeks. I'm just catching these with a really thin edge highlight, Fenrisian grey, just to make these areas really stand out. Keep these lines nice and thin. Just apply an edge highlight, Fenrisian grey, on all the sharpest points of the skin. On the hands here I'm doing things like the tips of the fingers and the knuckles. And on the feet I'm just doing a thin edge highlight around the very edge. With that Fenrisian grey applied, that is the skin highlighted. Next thing to do though will be to paint in the eyes. To start off with, I'm coming in with some Abaddon black first. I'm going to sink this into the recesses of her eye sockets, obviously being nice and careful around all the other skin we've already painted and highlighted. Now with some white scar, I'm coming in and I'm going to apply a thin line in the middle of the black we just applied. Keeping these nice and thin, nice and neat, just a small thin line of white in the middle of the eyes. And finally with some Abaddon black again, just going to add a small vertical line in the middle of the white, which will act like a pupil. And with that skin highlighted and the eyes done, it's really helped bring the model to life. So now the next step, I'm going to start highlighting all of the armour. So for the armour, I'm coming in with some Ushabti bone. I'm going to apply this as a thin edge highlight around all of the armour panels. For some of these sharper ones, like here, you can use the side of your brush against the sharp edge, and it'll just pick out the very edges of the armour panels, giving you a nice smooth edge highlight. But for other ones, you will have to use the tip of your brush. Just try and keep a nice smooth, even line as you apply an edge highlight around all of the panels of the armour. Now this step will take a while, but it's really worth it because it makes all of these armour panels pop out and adds interest all over the model. So just take your time, work your way around the model, picking out all of these edges with a thin edge highlight of Ushabti bone. So there are a lot of panels that we've painted with Tau Light Ochre, but just make sure you work your way around the model and pick out all of the edges and raise details with a thin edge highlight of Ushabti bone. Try and keep these lines nice and even as you apply them all over these armour panels. If at any point you do come in a little bit too thick, you can come back in with some Tau light ochre again, thin the lines down. Just by keeping a nice even pressure on the tip of your brush, you should get nice smooth, even lines of your Shabbity bone as an edge highlight all over the armour. I'm also going to apply this edge highlight to all of the ochre panels on her gun as well. Once again, just keeping these nice and even as I work my way around the gun, picking out every edge and every raised detail with a thin edge highlight of your Shabbity bone. And with the edge highlight of Shabbity bone applied, you can see it's really added interest and definition all over the model. So now it's time to start highlighting the undersuit. So for this, I'm coming in with some Rhinox hide. I'm going to start off by applying this on all of the areas where the Nuln oil didn't settle. So here where the Nuln oil settled into all of these creases, I'm coming in on either side with some Rhinox hide and bringing the areas of undersuit back up to their original colour. So you can see wherever the Nuln oil has settled, I'm coming in on either side and bringing these areas back up to their original colour of Rhinox hide. And with that Rhinox hide applied, it's brought the original colour back up to those areas of the undersuit. So now, with a 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and Mournfang brown, I'm going to apply this in the middle of the areas that we've just applied the Rhinox hide. So this will help build up to a nice smooth transition up to a much lighter colour for our final highlights all over this undersuit. So just take your time at this step and work your way around the model, and in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Rhinox hide, put a little bit of this mix to help begin that transition up to our lightest highlights. But you want to focus this into the middle of all the areas, but also to the most raised details and highest points where the light would catch the most. And with that mix applied, you can see it's brightened up those areas of the undersuit even more. So now the next step is I'm going to come in with some Mournfang brown, and I'm going to apply this in the middle of all the areas that we just applied our previous mix. So once again, focusing this up towards the highest points, most raised details. Just going to apply a little bit of pure Mournfang brown into the middle of all the areas that we just applied our previous step. So when you apply this, you want to leave a little bit of the mix we just applied showing through at the edges. Just work your way around the model and apply a little bit of Mournfang Brown in the middle of all the areas that we just applied our mix. And with that Mournfang Brown applied, you can see it's added some more brightness to those areas. So there's just one final step left to apply to highlight the undersuit. And that'll be with some XV88. I'm going to come in and apply a thin edge highlight on the sharpest points and most raised details of the undersuit. So if you've got a sharp edge or a large fold, just coming in and applying a thin edge highlight of XV88 onto these areas as an edge highlight. Keep these lines nice and thin and just focus them onto the most raised parts and sharpest edges. Give a really nice highlighted effect all over that undersuit. And with that XV88 applied, that is the undersuit highlighted. So the next step is I'm going to highlight the pouches and the strap. So for this I'm coming in with some Scrag Brown. I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight on the edge of all of these pouches. So all the sharpest folds and edge details, I'm just catching these with a thin edge highlight of Scrag Brown. I'm also going to pick out any of the raised details on the strap. So it's got this pattern going down it, so I'm just picking out all of these raised points with a thin edge highlight of Scrag Brown. And with that Scrag Brown applied, you see it's given a nice highlight to all of the Mournfang Brown. So the next step is I'm going to highlight all of the areas of black. So for this I'm coming in with some Eshin Grey first. And I'm going to apply this to all the areas of black fabric. So it's all of these areas here of strapping. I'm going to catch these with a thin edge highlight of Eshin Grey. Keeping these lines nice and thin and just picking out any of these straps with a thin edge highlight of Eshin Grey. With that Eshin Grey we've highlighted all of the straps. So now it's time to highlight the rest of the black details. For this I'm coming in with some Mechanica Standard Grey. So first I'm starting off on the hair here, and I'm just picking out all of the strands of hair with a thin line of Mechanica Standard Grey. Keep these nice and thin. Just pick out all of these strands of hair with a thin highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. For the hooves, I'm picking out this join here in the middle, as well as the ones at the side of the feet. I'm just going to pick out any other black details with a thin edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey as well. So it's areas here, like on the gun where we painted some of those panels black. Just coming in and giving these a thin edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. Want to be nice and careful with these. Just make sure you catch all the edges to all the black panels with some Mechanica Standard Grey. And with that Mechanica Standard Grey applied, it's all of the black details highlighted. So next thing I'm going to move on is to paint the symbol on her shoulder. So for this I'm coming in with some Celestra Grey first. And I'm going to paint the symbol right here in the middle of her shoulder pad, making sure to leave that ochre rim but catch all of the internal symbol with some Celestra Grey. See, after a couple of layers of Celestra Grey, we've got a nice solid off-white colour all over that symbol. Now with some known oil, I'm going to apply this into the recesses of the symbol, just going around the little circle at the top and around the edge with some known oil. And once the known oil is dried, you can see it's really added definition to that symbol on her shoulder. So I'm just coming in with some white scar. I'm going to apply a thin edge highlight around all the details, so just picking out the very edge of that circle and around the rest of the details of the symbol. I'm just picking it out with a thin edge highlight of white scar. So with that white scar highlight, it's really made that symbol pop out on her shoulder. Now with some Deepkin Flesh, I'm going to highlight the little bits of rope or strapping, so these holding on these gems, just picking these out with a real thin edge highlight of Deepkin Flesh. Deepkin Flesh applied to those ropes. The next thing I'm going to move on to is highlighting the gems themselves. So for this I'm coming with some Moot Green first. I'm going to apply this as a real thin edge highlight on all the sharpest angles on these gems, just picking out any sharp angles with a thin line of Moot Green. And there's just one step left to apply to these gems, and that's with some white scar, just applying a small dot in the corner to act like a reflection point of light, just a tiny spot on each one of white scar. And with those gems highlighted, the next thing I'm going to move on to is painting the lens on the sight of her gun. So for this I'm coming in with some Mephiston Red. This will be a really nice colour to break up the rest of the colours on the model. Just applying this all over the lens on her sight, and there's a couple of other lenses at the bottom of the gun as well. So I'm picking these out with a layer of Mephiston Red. With those lenses picked out, the next step is with some Evil Sun Scarlet. I'm going to come in and paint a line at the bottom and the right hand side of the scope on the lens, and on these ones on the bottom just doing like a little semicircle in the bottom right hand corner of each of the lenses. And now with some Wild Rider Red, I'm going to put a thin line within the ones we just applied to make this nice and small, just at the very edge, just applying a thin line of Wild Rider Red. And with those colours applied, there's just one final step. and that's to come in with some white scar and apply thin dot at the very corner, just to act like the light's reflecting in that point. And with those gun lenses highlighted, the only things left to paint now are the metallics. So first one, coming in with some Storm Hose Silver. And I'm going to highlight the areas we painted with Lead Belcher. So it's just doing an thin edge highlight all over her sword, catching the sharpest angles. The thin highlight Storm Hose Silver. And also this little bit here on like the horseshoe at the bottom of her foot, just catching this with some Storm Hose Silver as well. The next up, I'm going to highlight any of the gold details. So for this I'm coming in with some Liberator Gold. I'm just going to apply this to any of the areas we paint with Retributor Armour. So any sharp edges, on the edge of any details again, I'm just picking these out with a thin edge highlight of Liberator Gold. And with that gold picked out, that is the main body to the model painted and highlighted. If you join me again next week, I'll show you how to paint a really nice effect on the cloak, as well as how to paint the head of the statue that she's standing on. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other Tau models you would like to see me paint? But don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!